Hello and welcome to everyone on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and my Limitless tribe. Thank you so much for joining me over here once again on this beautiful Wednesday evening if you are in India, and morning if you are there in any of the Western worlds. So, I want to start this day with one small anecdote which just got refreshed in my mind while I was going through my guest's book, Your Leadership Legacy. So the anecdote goes like this. So it was the time of the freedom struggle that we were going through in, around the beginning of 1900s. And there was this lady who walked into Mahatma Gandhi, and she had a son who used to eat a lot of sweets, basically take sugar, and he was diabetic. So she and he was the one who used to look up to Mahatma Gandhi. So she walked, I mean, she traveled a long distance and went to Mahatma Gandhi and requested him that my child eats a lot of sugar and he is diabetic. He should not be doing that. If you ask him not to eat, he would stop. So Gandhiji just looked at her and he said, "Why don't you come a couple of weeks later?" Now the woman had walked, I mean, traveled a long distance. She was a bit disappointed, but nonetheless, she agreed. She went back and she came back up a couple of weeks later. And this time, when she came back, Gandhiji told the son that you should not eat sweets as it, kind of harms you. And the lady asked, she was like puzzled. You could have said the same thing a couple of weeks back. Why did you make me come back again? To that, Mahatma Gandhi replied that at that point of time, I was eating sugar myself. So, how could I tell your son not to? So this is the sign of a great leader. And this anecdote I had heard before, and it just got refreshed in my mind when I was going through Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch's, book, Your Leadership Legacy. He has been 23 years into the career as a lieutenant into the US Army, and he has held numerous leadership positions in the infantry and armor branches. He retired from the army in September 2009, and since then he has taken up a lot of different leadership positions inside of the army in different cadres. And he's also received 31 military service awards, including the Bronze Star, and then 8 meritorious service medals and the humanitarian service medals. So let's bring on Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch to the show with a warm round of applause.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for joining me over here.
Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited. I really am appreciative of you having me come be on your show. And what is 42nd show? So you're working toward that milestone of 50.
Yes.
There.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I definitely feel so humbled that a person who has been into the service of his country has joined me over here for the first time ever in the history of this show. So definitely a very, very humbling moment for me.
Well,
So, yes, sir, why don't you share your journey as to, why did you choose to first be a part of the army? Because that's not a path which is generally chosen by every youngster who's growing up. And then you continued for 23 long years, and even later on you have kind of served them in different positions. So what has your journey been like? Why did you go there, and do you feel you have fulfilled that purpose that you came for?
Yeah, so a lot of people have asked that question. Why did you choose going into the Army? And I always tell them, I mean, and it's absolutely the truth, the reason why I did it. My father never finished the 5th grade. My mother never finished the 10th grade. Now they went back and got their high school equivalent degree, but they never finished those grades. They left school, and yet I got to go to the United States Military Academy at West Point, and I got to be an officer in the Army and retire a lieutenant colonel in the Army and have all kinds of great experiences. Nowhere else in the world do I exist. I mean, in most worlds, and I've been in 45 countries on five continents. Most countries, somebody who comes from my background doesn't get the opportunities that I got. So I always thought to myself that I wanted to make sure to serve my country and protect the freedoms and the way of life that we had, so that other young men and women, my children, somebody else's children, got the same opportunities I got growing up. And I always tell people that the 23 years I served in the Army on active duty, and then the additional years I've spent working for the Army, not as a soldier, but just working for the Army, have been unbelievable. And I wouldn't trade a single minute of any of it. Wow. I've got to do some amazing things, got to go see some amazing places. And I certainly would not be where I am today if it hadn't been for the Army.
Amazing, amazing. So basically, life aligned you with your purpose quite early in your life. Otherwise, sometimes our life completely, goes till the end without, us finding our purpose and serving our purpose.
Yeah, I was lucky. I mean, probably about my sophomore year in high school, so my second year in high school, I kind of figured out where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, because I'd been a leader, captains of my athletic teams, and I was class president, and I eventually became student government president and all that. So I'd had some leadership positions, and I enjoyed being a leader, and I thought I was pretty good at it, and so that I kind of figured out that I wanted to be a leader, and I chose the Army as the path to do that in. And I could have picked other paths, and my father-in-law always told me that, if you'd picked the business world and you'd gone out in the business world with all of your leadership skills and your work ethic and all those things, you probably would have made $1 million. And I said, well, that's good, but that's not what I wanted to do. And I'm very happy with the route I took. I have no regrets.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you are a big advocate of leadership, because you yourself has served as a leader in a different capacities all throughout your life. So now, would you let us know as to what are the different kinds of leaderships that are there, and why did you choose the path of servant leadership?
Yeah, so I've seen leadership on a lot of different levels and a lot of different ways. And of course, in the military especially, there are those people who believe, it's all authoritarian and I'm going to tell you what to do and you got to do it. And no, you can't, there's no variation. Those are horrible leaders. And I've had those, believe me, and nobody wants to work for somebody like that. And then I had leaders that were the servant leaders who believed that it was all about the people. It was all about the organization, that it wasn't about them. And so I enjoyed working for those people. And not only did I enjoy working for them, but I could see that the organization ran smoother and everybody wanted to be a part of the organization and help make sure that we got things done. And we're able to use our own ideas, our own initiatives a lot more than somebody who was very authoritarian. So a couple things on that, I preach that servant leadership and I believe in it. And that's what I try to pass on to everybody. And I do believe it's this generation's leaders' obligation to pass on leadership to the next generation, to teach them how to be good leaders. And so in that vein, I always tell, right now in my day job, I recruit for Army ROTC. And for those who don't understand what ROTC is in America, it's how we produce 75% of our officers in the Army. You either go to West Point or you go through basically ROTC. And so I'm helping to produce second lieutenants in the Army. And the day they get their commission, I always tell everyone, enjoy today because today is all about you. After we pin those bars on your shoulder and you become an officer in the United States Army, it will never be about you ever again. It's about your soldiers. It's about the mission. It's about the company. It's about the Army. It's about the country. And oh, by the way, then if we have time, we might talk about you, maybe, but it's not about you.
Amazing, amazing. So you also had a book that you published this year, Your Leadership Legacy. So it's a beautiful book. I went through that, and one of the contexts you talk about the leader earning his position all day, every day, in spite of him having actually the position given to him. So why does a leader need to earn that leadership position when he already has that?
Yeah, so I'm not a believer, just because you have a title doesn't mean that you're a good leader, and doesn't even mean you're a leader. I mean, I've had people, I know of people who have the title of being a boss or a CEO or whatever, who have no leadership skills whatsoever. I mean, they just got the job, however they got it. So to me, you're really not the leader until the people who work for you decide that you're the leader. You may be the boss. There's a difference between being the boss and being a leader. I believe that. And so you may be the boss because you have the position, you have the title, but you may not be the leader. The people who work for you have to decide that you're going to be their leader. And so you have to earn that every day. Every single day, you have to prove to them that you deserve their respect, you deserve their admiration, and you deserve that you are taking care of them and earning all those things, because that's the only way you're going to be a good leader.
Amazing. It's basically about walking the talk.
Yeah,
Rather than just talking. If you just are doing the deeds that you're talking about, they automatically follow you as a leader. They look up to you.
absolutely. It's about deeds, not words. And my father used to tell me, he'd say, son, if your words say one thing and your actions say another thing, it is your actions that are going to be believed. You can talk all you want. Nobody cares. What you do is what people care about, and they will watch what you do. And if you're the leader and you don't believe everybody who works for you is watching everything you do, you're pretty naive. Okay? Because they are watching everything you do, and you set a new standard every time you do something. So
Yes.
you need to make sure, and I always tell anybody who I talk to, and in the book I talk about it, that you are that moral compass of your organization. You have to do what's right. Leaders do what's right because it's the right thing to do, not because somebody's going to check up on them, not because somebody's going to see it or whatever. Nobody may ever know, but you still do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. That's what leaders do.
Absolutely. So, does that mean that as a parent, when we are raising our children, it's also a form of leadership? Because even with children, we need to walk our talk because they only look at what we do rather than what we say. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And I always tell people when I'm giving my leadership that, look, when we're training leaders, we ought to start with leaders of the family. Because if you can't lead your own family, how are you going to lead anything else? And that's men and women. We need to train people. People need to lead their family first. Then they move out, and then maybe they are leading their organization. Then they're a leader in their community, and maybe if you're lucky, you might be a leader in your state or your the federal government or whatever, and you might make a difference in the world, but not just in the community. But you got to start with your family. You got to be a good leader in your family. And I think, obviously, nobody's perfect. Although, like I told you before, I tell my wife I'm perfect. She's not buying it, but I keep trying to convince her that I'm perfect. But none of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. So we got to understand that. But we really do have to try every day to set that example for our families and for the people who work for us, that this is the right way to do things. And I've tried to do that throughout my life. I've always said that when I was in a leadership position, when somebody would ask me what my number one job is, and I'd always tell them my number one job is to every day make every one of the people who work for me want to be like me. Set that example, what a leader looks like, what a good person looks like. Because I believe that in my book and leadership, it's not just about leadership, it's about being a good person. And if you're not a good person, I don't think you can be a good leader. I just don't believe it. You might be a boss and you might have the position of being the leader, but I don't think you're going to be a good leader if you're not a good person.
Amazing, amazing. So actually, I think there was one incident that you mentioned in the book where I think you speak to the youth, because you do a lot of public speaking assignment and you speak to a lot of youth, and when you come home you feel like, you know, you have been, as if been, you have been kind of beaten by the, you know, the bat.
Yes.
Because you need to kind of depict yourself in that. I mean, would you like to kind of elongate on that and
Yeah.
tell us?
So you know, when anytime I'm out in front of people, again, I think you got to set the example, and I think that part of that is you got to show people how a leader acts, how they stand, how you know, good posture, how they use their hand and arm gestures, how they communicate, how they answer questions, how they interact with everybody in the audience when they ask questions. And so I think, you know, you're on display. And a lot of times I'll go out and I'll talk to a high school and I'll spend all day at the high school. I'll be there for 7 hours. So I'll give the same lecture 7 times in a row, 45-minute lecture 7 times in a row. So I'll be there for 7 hours or so. And by the end of the day, I mean, I just feel worn out, and just because, you know, and all I'm doing is talking, right? But I'm not. I'm actually on display, and I'm trying to set that example. And so it's very draining, not only mentally but kind of physically as well, as you're trying to make sure that you're setting a good example on how you're acting and standing and talking and all those things. So yeah, it can be pretty draining to set that example every day. But I think that's got to be your goal, is to do that, to set that example for everybody who's in your sphere of influence, because you are influencing them all.
Yes.
You may be good, maybe bad, depending on what you're doing, but you
Yes.
are influencing them. There is no doubt about it.
Amazing. So, to maintain discipline, because and focus. I mean, whatever organization that you're leading, be it the army, be it corporates, be it an educational institution, to maintain the discipline, focus, and purpose of all the people who are working over there, is it important for us to take stern decisions? Or if rather someone makes mistake, is it okay to warn them one time and let them kind of, you know, correct themselves? Or we need to be actually stern in the first time to set the right example for others, so that, you know, it does not happen the second time?
Yeah, so I believe that, first of all, I believe that one of the most important jobs of a leader is to develop the culture of that organization. And the culture will drive decisions, it will drive actions, it will drive all those things that your employees, the people who work in that organization, are striving toward. I believe that, and I think that's one of the most important things. So I think I think it depends on where your organization is in that building of that culture, when you decide how you decide you want to handle those type of things in the beginning. So I've taken over organizations that were broken, and I had to fix them. And so in that case, I was very strict in things that I wanted done. And if they weren't done, I made it very clear that if there were certain non-negotiable rules, non-negotiable things that had to be done, and if they weren't done, that you weren't going to work for me anymore. And I've had to do that on a couple occasions. Had to let people go because they just wouldn't do the things that I asked them to do. And I kind of, you know, did I set an example of one of them? I absolutely did. But I thought that it needed to be done to change the culture of that organization and to change the direction it was going in. And it did. That organization did a 180-degree turn, and we accomplished all the things that we had set out to accomplish in 3 years.
Would you share that incident with us to
Yeah.
make things more clearer?
Yeah. So when I took over as the professor of military science of an Army ROTC unit at the University of South Alabama. So again, running an ROTC program that was producing second lieutenants. Every time in the American Army, when you take over a new job, they send you to school so that you can learn some things that you need to know. Excuse me. To do your job. And so here, this was a 3-week school. So me and a bunch of other lieutenant colonels went to this school, and we were all sitting there, and we learned a bunch of things. I couldn't tell you half of the stuff we learned. Really didn't matter. But what I remembered coming out of there was the 2-star general, the person in charge of ROTC, Cadet Command, came in and he talked to us, and there was about 30 of us in a room, and we were all getting ready to take over an ROTC program. And he said, look, if you're taking over an organization that doesn't make its mission, hasn't made its mission, then you need to stay awake at night figuring out how to fix that program. And I was taking over an organization that hadn't made its mission in 7 years. And so I took that to heart, and I went back to my room that night, and I took out a 3x5 card, which still sits on my desk. And I wrote down how I was going to fix that unit. And the first thing I wrote was my goal. And my goal was to have 150 cadets in the program after 3 years. And the program I was taking over only had 53 cadets in it. So I was talking about tripling the program in 3 years. And then I wrote down some things on how I was going to do that. Number one was take care of the cadets in our program. Because if you don't take care of cadets, if you don't take care of the people in your organization, they're going to leave. Right. And the second thing I put down there was, as we discussed earlier, make every one of those cadets want to be like me. So I want to set the example for them every day, show them what an officer looks like, how they talk, how they interact with people, all those things. So then I went back to my organization after I took over and had during my first conference with them, with the people who were working for me. I told them, what I expected. We were going to grow the program, triple the program, and they all kind of laughed. And then I said, and the way we're going to do this is, and I went down that list and I said, listen to me. The only reason you get paid and the only reason you are here is to take care of the cadets in this program. If I ever catch you not taking care of cadets in this program, you will end the program. And I made them all shake their head that they all understood what it was I just told them. So about 3 weeks later, I'm walking down the hall and I see one of my cadets knock on the door of one of my cadre members. And as I walk by, I see the cadre member is sitting at his desk with his feet up on the desk, drinking a Coke, talking on his cell phone. And he told my cadet, go away, come back tomorrow. I'm busy.
Right.
So I told that cadet, I said, go sit out in front of my office. I'll be there in a minute and I'll take care of you. And I went back to my office and I wrote down a few things on a piece of paper. And I walked back into that cadre member's office and I put it on his desk. And I said, pack your stuff, get out, you're fired. You don't work here anymore. And he said, you can't fire me. I said, well, I think I just did. In fact, I know I just did. Pack your stuff, get out. You don't work here. And I fired him. And I never had to do that again. At the end of 3 years, we went from 53 cadets to 179 cadets in 3 years. And we did it by the culture of that organization, that we took care of the cadets in that organization. Now, that cadet that I helped, that man turned away, he was a freshman. He graduated 3 years later and commissioned. Would he have graduated and commissioned anyway, even if I hadn't taken care of him that day? Maybe, but maybe not. Who knows? But that's the type of things that you got to be able to do. You got to create that culture that allows people to understand what their lane is and what it is that is expected of them. And then if they're not meeting that standard, you can't be afraid to tell them that they're not. And whether you want to set the example in the beginning, like I did there, but later on, it goes back to just having that conversation with people. And I have found, I don't know how many times, that you'll tell somebody, look, you're not meeting the standard here. And they'll look at you. They had no idea that they weren't doing what you wanted them to do. Mm-hmm. So I always tell bosses when I talk to people and leaders, when I counsel them and all that and give my presentation, I would say, look, if somebody's not giving you what you want and you're not telling them, you're at fault. It's your fault just as much as it is theirs, because they may not even know that they're not giving you what you want.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're not communicating enough.
Yeah. And communication is huge. I mean, if you want to be a leader, you got to be able to communicate. You have to be able to.
Yes. We have actually a question from Ankur Singh over here. Do you think government also brainwashes soldiers without letting them know what is truth in any dispute? Just use them into war, just like a brainwash puppet?
No, I don't. There was probably a time when that was maybe the case, but I will tell you that this generation wants to know why. And I don't care if they're in the Army. I don't care if they're wherever they are. This generation is asking the question, why? When I was a young man, I never asked why. Somebody told me to do something, I did it. That was what we did. This generation, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with this generation asking the question why. Now, it took a little while for this old man to get out of the habit of not telling people why, but in the end, I figured it out that if you tell young men and women why they're doing something, that it then becomes they're more willing to buy into what you're asking them to do. And I always use this analogy. I hate math. Math and I do not get along. I do not like numbers whatsoever. That's why I was a history major. But because I just don't understand, you can give me equations and equations don't mean anything to me. But I loved physics. And I always tell people the reason I loved physics was because not only they had all kinds of equations in there, but there was a reason why I needed that equation to build a better bridge, to build a better house, to build a better whatever. So the why, even though I didn't know it as a young man, I wanted the why. I just never asked. This generation asked for it, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm finding out that if you tell them not only what you want done, but why you want it done, now they buy into it, and they're more excited and motivated to do the things that you ask them to do. So I don't think that the government can get away with that anymore. There was a time when we probably could have, that the government probably could have, and the military probably could have, but I don't think that's the case anymore.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for answering that question. And thank you, Ankur Singh. I hope you got the answer to the question that you asked. And sir, what is basically the difference between managing change and implementing change? What is the major difference?
Yeah. So, I always tell in the book and in my presentation, I always tell people, and I always tell leaders when I talk to them, that, look, if you're managing change, you're already behind the power curve. Somebody is dictating to you what you have to do. And if you're a good leader, you ought to be able to have that vision, because that's part of your job as a leader, is to have a vision of where you want that organization to go a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. That's your job as a leader. And if you're not doing that, then what happens is you get caught up and these changes come that you're not expecting. If you have that vision, you ought to be able to foresee most of the changes that are going to come. You're always going to get surprised every now and again, or you're going to have a boss that comes up with a good idea. I got that. But most of the time, if you're a good leader, you will know what changes need to be taken and done before they're coming, so that you can stay in the forefront of your industry. So if you're managing change, you're reacting. If you are comfortable with change and you have a good vision, then you're the one directing the change, and then you are in control rather than have somebody else in control and you're reacting to them. And I think that's huge. If you don't have a vision, and part of the reason that leaders don't have a good vision is because they get tied up in the day-to-day operations of an organization. They start to micromanage stuff. They want to be involved in things that they don't need to be involved in, instead of doing their job, which is the vision and the strategic part of keeping the organization moving in the right direction, having that vision, creating that culture, doing the things that need to be done to allow the people who work in that organization to do the things that you're asking them to do.
That's a great difference, I think. a whole lot of a difference.
Yes, absolutely. And you got to be that person with the vision and who's directing the change rather than managing the change, or you're just chasing your tail. You're never going to get anywhere if you're that person who's trying to manage change. I always tell people, not only is it dangerous to manage change, it's stupid. You need to be that person directing the change. That's why you're the leader.
Absolutely. And you also talk about Napoleon's Corporal in one of the references. I loved that concept actually. You kind of told us the incident about Napoleon, you know. You can go ahead and
Yeah.
tell us what exactly is that and how the leaders manage using that.
Yeah. So and I'm assuming that most of your audience who know Napoleon was probably the greatest general that ever lived. We still in our army use things that Napoleon developed back in 1805. So and when he was directing a battle, he would be up on his big white stallion, and he'd be directing a war or a conflict, a battle, and his generals would be out on the battlefield. And before he would issue them an order, he always had a corporal that would stand right next to his horse, and they'd be standing there. And before he would issue an order to his generals, he would issue it to that corporal, and he'd say,
Right.
he would tell that corporal what the order was that he was going to issue to his generals. And if that corporal could tell him in his own words what it was that that Napoleon wanted his generals to do, then he would issue the order. If he couldn't, then he realized that it could be misunderstood.
Right.
That old adage that if it can be misunderstood, it will be. And he would say, that's not a good order. Then I got to start over. And he'd start over, and then he'd issue it to him again until that corporal could tell him what he wanted. And I always tell people, if you're a leader, you have to have that person, that Napoleon's Corporal in your life. And it has to be somebody. It can't be a yes man. It can't be somebody who's going to kiss your butt and tell you, yep, I'll do whatever. I'll tell you whatever you want to hear. That's not the person that you need. You need somebody who's not afraid to hurt your feelings. And for me, it's always been my wife. My wife is, and believe me, my wife has no problems hurting my feelings. Okay. In fact, I think she enjoys it sometimes, but she's always been the one that I would come home and I'd say, hey, hon, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this. And she'd listen to me and she'd look at me and say, you sure you want to do that? That's pretty dumb. And I was like, well, I thought I wanted to, maybe I don't. And then when I think about it, you know what? She was right. It was pretty stupid. She's kept me from doing some pretty dumb things in my life. We all need that person. And if you don't have that person, you're going to do some dumb things. I promise you.
Amazing, amazing. I think it's pretty neat the way you explain this because, yeah, whatever can be misunderstood will be misunderstood. And yes, if we kind of get it through a few people and make sure that we have gotten our message clear and concise and it has gone through them correctly, then
Yeah.
yes, the rest of the world, people will also follow through.
Yeah. Well, and I along that lines, I have a friend, a good friend who used to be a head football coach, American football here in America. Now he's moved on to bigger and better things. But he always used to tell me that not only did he pick captains for his team, so he had a captain for the offense, a captain for the defense, for special teams. He had about 6 captains. But then he'd have about 3 people that he designated as communication officers. And so that he didn't have this problem. And those 3 people understood that they had a right to come into his office anytime and say, hey, coach, you got to re-communicate this because there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about what you're trying to accomplish here. And then he'd have to rethink about what it was that he just said and wanted done and issue out new directives, new orders, new ideas about what it was that he wanted done. So I think that, that was a brilliant idea. I'd never even thought about that. But now I'm an advocate of that. And I tell people that you need to have 1 or 2 people out there who that's their whole focus is listening to what you're telling them, trying to gauge what everybody's understanding. And if there's a misunderstanding there, they need to come back to you and say, hey, boss, nobody understands what you just said. You need to do a better job of it. And again, going back to communication, we said earlier, I said earlier how huge communication is, and it really is. It is one of the things. If you don't have good communication in your organization, I promise you, your organization is not going to be as good or effective or efficient as it should be. And sometimes it's hard to figure out whether or not you have good organizational communication, because I always tell people, one of the biggest problems with communications is that people believe that it actually happened when it really didn't. Just because you sent an email doesn't mean you communicated anything. And we got to understand that in this world of, it was easy when communication was face to face. I could look you in the eye and I could tell whether or not you understood what I was telling you to do. When I send you an email, I don't get to look in your eyes. I don't understand whether or not you understood it or not. So we got to make that effort to make sure that people really understand what it is we're asking them to do.
So true. Leaders who refuse to listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. Yes. What do you mean when you say this?
Well, it goes back to communication. Listening is a part of communication, and I would argue a huge part of communication. If you're not listening to people, then two things. Number one, you're alienating people. They don't believe they're a part of the organization if you're not willing to listen to their ideas and their thoughts and their gripes and complaints and when they're happy, whatever, you got to listen to them. And number two, if you're not listening to people, then you are only making decisions, only doing things using your experience and your knowledge. And I don't care how good you are at what you do, there are other ways to do what you do, and there's better ways to do what you do sometimes, and you've got to be willing to listen to those. And I use the example of this. My father's best friend when I was growing up, he worked at Chrysler Motor Company. Mm-hmm. And he worked in an assembly plant where they were putting together automobiles. And his job, he worked at Chrysler for 38 years. His job for 38 years was to put fenders on whatever vehicle was being built in that factory. So if you were running that factory and all of a sudden you had problems with fenders, who would you go talk to? I hope you would talk to the expert, the guy who's been doing it for 38 years.
Right.
He probably knew there was a problem. And I promise you, he went and told somebody and they didn't listen. They said, go back and do whatever it is you do. I'm busy. I don't have time to talk to you. And so he probably said, okay, they're not interested in what I have to say. And now we got a problem. So you got to listen to people, listen to them. Again, that's part of communication, is listening to them. Not only that part of it, but just listening to their ideas. I always tell people when I try to make a decision, when I have time, I will bring all of my junior leaders together. And if I have time and the organization's small enough, I'll bring everybody and I'll say, okay, here's what we got to do. Give me some ideas of how we can make this happen. And two things happen when I do that. Number one, they feel like they're a very valued part of the organization. They get to say in what it is we're going to do. Yes. And number two, they have buy-in. Now it isn't Colonel McCulloch's decision on what we're going to do. It's our decision on what we're going to do. And now we go fix it. And now they got some skin in the game and they're willing to work a little bit harder. Again, that's all part of listening. If you're not willing to listen, then number one, you're a bad leader, I believe. And number two, you might even be considered a dictator. If you think communication is a one-way street, only you talking, not listening, then you're probably a dictator. You're really not a leader.
So very interesting. When you say this, what comes to my mind is Hitler was called a dictator. And he was very successful at, carrying out whatever vision he had, though a negative one, but he was very successful at carrying that out. How did he actually manage doing that?
Who was it you're talking about?
Hitler.
Oh, yeah. So, leaders can be good or bad. I mean, they can be good at being a leader, and they can be a good leader, but do bad things. And Hitler was able to make people understand, or at least he got them to believe what he wanted them to believe. Him and his organization. How he did that with propaganda, fear, lots of different ways to do it, ways that are not any part of a servant leadership style that I talk about. But throughout history, we've had leaders who do bad things and get people to agree to help him along the way, or her. So I think that's one of the things that we have to be careful of. Again, I believe that we have to get back to training people and teaching and developing servant leaders. And people always, when I say that, people who don't know anything about leadership, they say, well, I don't believe in servant leadership, because then that means you just let people run all over you. Well, we've been on the show now for about 40 minutes. You believe I let anybody run over me?
No, absolutely not.
So. Yeah,
absolutely not. Yeah,
that's not what servant leadership means. Servant leadership means you are going to have to make people do things that they don't want to do, because it's in their best interest. And that's the whole part of being a servant leader, is taking care of the people who work for you.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. I had a friend when we were lieutenants, one of the other lieutenants in my unit. We were talking, and we were getting ready to go out to the National Training Center. We were going to do some big training event that we, the lieutenants, get a big part of their evaluation is on how well you do out there. And he says, Sergeant so-and-so really needs to go to this next school so he can get promoted, but I'm going to have to push that off so that I have him when we go to the National Training Center. And I said, are you crazy? I said, you're going to sacrifice this man's promotion capability so that you get a better evaluation. I said, you have just lost that man. That man will never follow you ever again. I said, that's insane. That is not what we're here for. And it all goes back to, chapter 2 of my book. I say it's not about you, and it's all about you, because it's not about you in what title you're going to get, that you're going to get more money, that you're going to live in a nicer house, you're going to get to drive a nicer car. All those things are nice, and lots of times that happens for a leader. Good for you, but that isn't why we made you the leader, and that should not be why you want to be the leader. If that's the reason you want to be a leader, so you get a better title and you make more money and you get to drive a nicer car, go do something else, because you're never going to be a good leader. The reason we make you a leader is why it's all about you. It's about taking care of those people who work for you. And sometimes that's hard love. Sometimes you got to make them do things that they don't want to do to make them, to take care of them. And it's all about helping that organization be the best organization it can be. And if you take care of the people, they will help you take care of the organization. As long as you have the right you've built the right culture, yes, and you have the vision for them to have the focus on doing, they will do that for you.
Absolutely.
And I've known that throughout my career that it works.
Yes. I saw you have given quite a lot of examples, and I think, it does work. Absolutely, no doubt about it.
I don't know why anybody would want to be any type of leader besides a servant leader. I really don't. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think part of it is the people who are more concerned about themselves. And
exactly. I was about to say, who have their own self-interests in the leading roles. Absolutely. I think they are the ones who, yes.
So they're the ones who are so concerned. And I've had bosses. I had a boss that was so concerned about his next promotion, and he wanted to make and all those things. And he was so afraid that somebody was going to make a mistake that would affect his promotion, that he was such a micromanaging, authoritarian leader. And it was horrible. Nobody wanted to work for this man. I had a leader later on in life when I was a captain who ended up being a 4-star general, by the way. So way smarter than me, obviously. And he used to tell me, Oak, there are 2 types of leaders. There's the authoritarian, and then there's the servant leader. He said, yes, the authoritarian is the micromanager. He said, you want to be as far away from that as you can be. He said, the servant leader is kind of like Genghis Khan. It's chaos. It's, everybody does whatever it is that they feel they need to do. And he said, you want to be as close to that as you can get. And the way you get there is by giving away your authority. You can't give away your responsibility. Leaders are always the one that's on the blame line, but you can give away as much authority as you want. And you can not only give away authority, but you give away, you give them the resources and the ability to do what it is you want them to do. And if you do that, now you're using their imagination. You're using their knowledge, their experience. If you're the micromanager and you're telling them exactly how to do it every step of the way, now they're only using your knowledge and your experience, because nobody's going to step out of line, because if they do and they make a mistake, you're going to crucify them.
Yes.
The other thing, you got to be willing to accept some mistakes. And again, nobody's perfect in this world. We're all going to make mistakes. And my philosophy has always been, because a boss of mine taught it to me, that he told me one day, he said, Oak, if you didn't make a mistake today, you probably didn't do anything. He said, we're all going to make mistakes. That's a given. What he cared about, and what I care about as the leader, is what do you do after you make the mistake? Do you try to hide it? Do you try to blame somebody else for it? Or do you say, hey, boss, I messed up. Here's how we're going to fix it. Let's go fix it. Fine.
But my question to you at that point is, yes, of course. I mean, no one is perfect and we all make mistakes. We learn, we move ahead. What if that mistake costs something big?
Yeah.
What if the things at stake are like, very, very, crucial?
Yeah. So I'm, one of the things that I always tell people, in some of the leadership positions I've had, positions in the Army, you got to understand, in the Army, as a combat arms officer, if you take your soldiers and you go into harm's way, you can do everything right, make all the right decisions. Somebody might still die. That's just the nature of the beast. So if you do something bad or you don't make good decisions, then lots of people may die. So I think part of the job as the leader is to try to keep that that decision-making process that's going on at the lower level on the right train track, so that it's headed in the right direction. And the way I do that is a couple ways. Number one, I give them what I call an objective. What do I want this to look like at the end? And then I give them some guideposts, some left and right limits. And I say, okay, you can use this much money. You can use these resources. You can use these people. You have this much time, whatever. And then I let them do it however they want to do it. But having said that, once a week, I may have them at a staff meeting, or I may have them come to my office, or I may go to their office and I may say, hey, where are you on this? And what's going on? I'm not telling them how to do it, but I'm trying to make sure that they're on the right path and they're not going to do stupid. And I tell people, people are going to make mistakes. A good leader doesn't let his people fail. Doesn't mean he doesn't let them make mistakes, but they're not going to fail, because that's the key. And it drives me nuts. And I have this disagreement with people, and there are plenty of leadership coaches out there and life coaches and people who believe that failure is a good thing, that you can. And I always tell people, failure is never a good thing. Does it happen every once in a while? Absolutely. And you should learn everything you can learn from it when it happens. But you should never, ever accept that failure is a good thing, because failure is not a good thing. Mistakes happen. I got it. But failure, you should try to make sure it never happens. You should never let the people who work for you fail, if at all possible. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. So I also got from your answer that decision making is it's one of the foremost parts of leadership process. If you are not taking right decisions at the right time, then again there is a fear of basically everything going haywire.
Yeah, I one of the biggest problems organizations have, that leaders have, is they're afraid to make decisions. And that's why we made you the leader, is to be in charge, make decisions. So you got to be able to do that. So you got to come up with, what makes you feel comfortable. Because as I go around and talk to people, I find people who can't make a decision or who don't like to make decisions. I say, so why? And they say, well, I don't have all the information I need.
Right.
That's fantasy land. You're very seldom in your life as a leader are you going to ever have all the information that you want to make a decision.
Not necessarily.
You're going to have a bunch of information. You're going to be missing some. You know what you got. You know what you're missing. You got to make some educated guesses based on your knowledge, your experience, the experience and knowledge of the people who work for you, who are the experts. Go get their experience. And then make a decision. You can always change the direction you're going as more information becomes available. But if you don't start down that road, then it doesn't matter, because by the time you get the information that you want, all the information you want, it's all going to be a moot point because you're already behind everybody else who's already made decisions.
Right. So true.
Plus the point that the people who work for you, if you can't make a decision, how much confidence do you think they have in you? If you're one of those wishy-washy people who can't make a decision, make a decision. One of the worst things you can do is not make a decision. And I think I used a quote that said, and I can't even remember who said it now, but the best thing you can do is make the right decision. The next best thing you can do is make a wrong decision. The worst thing you can do is make no decision. Make no decision.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even in life, I mean, I'm not even talking about leadership here, but I think, for every person who wants to lead a life of fulfillment and a quality life, I think at every stage, they have to make a decision. And a lot of times I see a lot of people struggling with taking decisions, and they kind of keep postponing, keep delaying, and that everyone else also suffers. Yeah. Whoever is aligned with them, be their friends, family, colleagues, anyone, everyone suffers.
I agree. And not only that they're afraid to make a decision, but then some people, I always tell people, life is all about decisions and consequences.
Yes.
And it's all about the decisions you make, because every decision you make has a consequence. It's either good or bad, but every decision you make has a consequence.
Yes.
You're going to get to the point in your life where you're making good decisions, making decisions that give you good consequences. And I always equate that to my father, who used to tell me, and he was a big believer in self-discipline. And he used to tell me, son, discipline yourself so other people don't have to. But he always used to tell me that he would never tell me, you can't do that. He'd say, here are the consequences. If you do that, you pick. I don't care. You want to be punished? You want to go do that bad that it's worth the punishment? Good for you to go do that. It was only about 2 or 3 times in my life where I picked that path. He taught me very quickly that wasn't the right answer. But yeah, it's all about decisions and consequences, and decision making is huge, not just for leaders, although it's huge for leaders, but in life, decision making is important, and you got to figure out a way to make that happen for you, where you feel comfortable making decisions without all the information that you want, because you're never going to have all the information. That just doesn't happen. Very seldom in your life.
Absolutely. So last thing in my this round, I mean, we will have a very short round after this, just a 5 minutes round. This is my signature question for my show. Do you believe in the limitlessness of a human being? And if you do, then who, according to you, is limitless?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that your talents, your life is all determined by you. You set your own breaks, you set your own limits, you do all those things to yourself. And it's all right here. It really is. I believe that. And I give another lecture, and as I was telling you before the show, that's going to be my next book on how to be successful. And part of it that I talk about is that are you driving with the brakes on? Are you your own worst enemy in limiting and not believing in yourself? Because if you believe in yourself, you can do just about anything you want to do. So I absolutely do believe that that we are limitless, or that we are limited by decisions we make and the things that we believe. And if you believe that you can do whatever you want to do, you can generally do it. So I don't think that there are limits out there on us except for what we put on ourselves. And again, I'm a pretty good example of that. I mean, I grew up in a town of 1,200 people, working on farms as a kid. Parents didn't have a whole lot of education, and yet I now have a master's degree. I retired a lieutenant colonel. I mean, you can do what you want to do. You just got to make that decision.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We move on to our next round. And that's a very short and sweet round. Sir, if I tell you define yourself in 2 sentences, what would you say?
So I believe for me, defining myself is self-disciplined, because I do believe self-discipline is the key to life, not just being a leader, but certainly being a leader, but the key to life. And I believe driven. I am a believer that results matter. It always drives me nuts when somebody says, well, we're going to play, but we're not going to keep score. Then I'm not playing. I want to win because we're all about results. I'm a very self-disciplined person, and I'm a very driven person. I want to be the best at whatever I'm doing. And my father, when I growing up, my father had what I call the 75% rule. And he said, son, whatever you choose to do in life, you need to be better than 75% of the people doing it, be in the top 25%. He said, if you're not, then you need to do one of 2 things. You either need to figure out how to get better at what you're doing, or you need to go find something else to do, because obviously it doesn't mean enough to you to be the best at what you want to be. And I've lived by that. And so I'm a very driven person.
Amazing. Beautiful, beautiful definition. What are the top 3 books that you have ever read that left a lot, a kind of indelible mark on you?
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's a good question. Number 1, the Bible. I read the Bible every morning. And number 2 is probably Lincoln on Leadership. President Lincoln was one of our greatest leaders, and I absolutely love that book. I've read it a couple of times now, and I absolutely love it. And then probably the last thing, although I'm not sure it's a book, it is in a book form that I have, is the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And I read through that because my job, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So I wanted to make sure I understood it very well and what I was making that oath to. And I've read it several times. Every time I got promoted, I had to retake that oath, and I would read through it again just to make sure that I still believed in what I was taking my oath for.
Wow. Awesome. That is. And what values have you lived your life with? Self-discipline, you already said when you defined yourself. But other than that, what have been your primary values that you have focused on in your life while taking any decisions?
Yep. So number 1 is integrity. Absolutely. That is the number 1 value that I think everybody has to have if you want to be not only a good leader, but a good person. Yes. And my father drilled that into me. My father used to say, son, nobody can take your integrity. You have to give that away. And that's absolutely true. So integrity is absolutely the number 1 value that I hold. Number 2, I think, is courage. And not just physical courage, although I think that's important. But for most people, that's not a big thing. But personal courage, making the right decisions because it's the right thing to do, even when it's not in your benefit. And there are times in your life where you're going to have to make decisions that don't help you, but they're still the right thing to do. And you need to do those. So I think that's the number 2. And then I think number 3 is respect. I believe in respect. I believe you need to respect everybody. Doesn't mean you agree with everybody. And I don't know how we got to this point in the world where if I disagree with you, now we obviously hate each other. That's just insanity to me. I don't understand it. Respect that's not respect. Respect.
That's not respect.
Everybody's opinion. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it.
Yes, yes.
But you need to respect that they have the right to that opinion. And so I believe, and to be treated as a decent human being. Everybody has that right, and so those are the three values that I try to live by. Besides the self-discipline, I'm not sure that that's really a value. That's just a way I live my life. But certainly integrity, courage, and respect are three of my top things that I believe in.
Perfect, perfect. So, who is this person in your life who has influenced you the most?
Wow, that's a good question. So certainly my father had a lot of influence on me, and some good, some bad. I mean, my father, I always tell people, my father was a mean old man. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I am who I am today in a large part due to him and my mother. My mother had a influence on me as well, but my father certainly had an influence on me. Besides that, I would say I would have to say my wife. I've been married now in 11 days, 12 days. It'll be 35 years. Will have been married to my wife, and she really is. She's not only is she my Napoleons Corporal, who is not afraid to hurt my feelings. She's my best friend. She's my best my worst critic. She's my I don't know where I would be today if it wasn't for her. So I'd say my father and my wife right now are the two people who have influenced me the most.
Amazing. Do you have any regrets?
No, I really don't have any regrets. And I know that sounds, that most people don't believe that, but I have done things that I believe were right. And some things that I knew that I did that were going to affect my career, and they did. But that's all right. I knew what I was doing was right. And I tell people I can look in the mirror every day and I like what I see looking back at me. Doesn't mean I haven't made mistakes in my life, and that, because I certainly have, but I would still do pretty much everything that I have done in my life. I would do it again.
Wonderful. What is your current hobby? I mean, what do you like doing when you are free?
Yeah. So I don't have enough free time, unfortunately. But when I always tell people, if I'm not working, whether it's my day job or recruiting or doing my leadership legacy stuff, then I'm fishing. I love to fish, and I just love being out, whether by myself or I generally can take one person in my 17-foot John boat that I have, and I'll take them out with me if somebody wants to go. But a lot of times I'm just out there by myself, and it's just my time to just reflect. I can do one of two things. I can either not think of anything and just fish, or I can fish and kind of reflect on some things that I need to think through and plan out and work through.
Nice. What is your favorite food?
I'm a steak guy. I got to have a steak.
Nice. I think one of your bosses had treated you to a steak.
That's right. Yeah. When he lost a bet with me, he had to come down and buy me a steak, and he did. To his credit, he drove down and he bought me my steak at my favorite restaurant. Yeah.
Right, right. And just the last question is, which part of the world did you fall in love with where you really want to spend more time?
Part of the world. Yeah. So like I said, I've been in 45 countries on 5 continents. The only 2 continents I haven't been on is Antarctica, which I will never go to because there's snow there, and I never want to see snow again. And I've never been to South America, which I will get to at some point because I want to fish the Amazon River. So I got to get to South America. But the two most beautiful places that I think I've ever been in my life. Number one is Yosemite National Park here in America, in California. It is absolutely beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And the other place is the South Island of New Zealand, which is absolutely gorgeous as well. And there's some other places that I want to get to that I know are beautiful. We talked, and my wife and I goal is to someday get to India because we'd love to come to India. There's some beautiful places, at least we've seen them on TV, that we'd love to go to.
Yes.
So I would certainly love to do that and get to India at some point. And And so, but certainly, in my opinion, the two places that I've been that are the most beautiful that I would love to go back to at some point is Yosemite National Park in the South Island of New Zealand.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, sir, for all your time and all the wisdom that you shared with us on leadership. I think it was kind of an eye opener because you have experienced it, you have lived that life, and you bring it from your own experience, and that makes a lot of difference. So, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Anshu. I mean, it really was a pleasure and an honor to be on your show. I enjoyed being on your show, and I hope to watch more of your shows, and as you get to 50 and maybe even 100, and keep going down this
Yes,
road.
absolutely. And maybe we will actually meet after past 600. Maybe we'll
Yeah,
meet again on the show.
I would love to be back on your show at some point. Maybe
Yes.
after I write my second book.
Yes, absolutely. Let's do that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you have a great day.
You too.
Thank you. Bye bye. Hey people, what a great episode it has been. And, I sometimes wonder when I started this journey of the Limitless show, I had never even fathomed in, my mind that I would be calling on such amazing people on this show from such different arenas of life. I mean, how God has been so kind and how the show is truly becoming more and more and more limitless because limitless is a journey. Limitless is not a destination. The way you keep exploring yourself, you keep, finding your strengths and kind of managing your weaknesses or making them better. It's the same thing with everything, and I can see the show it has evolved a lot, and and we are only 42 episodes old, so I see us going into 1,000 episodes. So to that, let's bring it to an end and let's meet next week. God bless you, take care of yourself, have a great week ahead, and hope you shine in this new year, meet all your goals and live your dream life. Bye bye.